done.
Okay. Okay, everyone. Welcome, one and all, to another Rusty Horn series. This week, our semifinalists are Karatidom and Fish in the B bracket. We are currently in Game 1, Warlock versus Warrior. It seems to be a Murloc Warlock up against a more traditional Warrior. Currently, we see 3 Murlocs out on the board for Fish. He's going to play in the Abusive Sergeant into the Knife Juggler for added damage, bringing Karatidom all the way down to 10 health on turn 4. Armorsmith draw from Karatidom doesn't look to help very much. The Unstable Ghoul will help haunt up some of that Murloc damage, but he's going to need to get rid of a lot more damage on the board if he's going to be able to survive the rest of the round. The Death Rattle on Death Spite will take care of the Abusive Sergeant and drop that Murloc back down to 2 attack, 1 health. So both cards remaining on the board for Fish will die to the Unstable Ghoul. The Iron Beak Owl draw off of his hero power will actually allow him to negate the Unstable Ghoul and push for damage through power overwhelming through his Knife Juggler. Cruel Taskmaster draw for Karatidom may help somewhat onto the Armorsmith for some extra armor, but overall not in good shape. He's going to draw off of the Gnomish Inventor and get Battle Rage, which is pretty good. He'll get 3 cards off of Battle Rage if he decides to play it, but he's out of mana, decides to armor up instead for that added 2 health. He'll trade off the rest of Fish's board with the Armorsmith and gain up to 4 armor. Life tap, hunting for any damage that he can get through. Fish will play the Knife Juggler as well as the Bluegill Warrior for that charge effect. Knife doesn't land where it needs to. Instead, it'll land on the Gnomish Inventor. He would have liked that to go into the Armorsmith to clear that off the board. Instead, Karatidom will gain 1 armor off the Armorsmith. Execute draw doesn't really help with the low health cards on the Warlock. You want to save that for big cards like Dr. Boom or Harrison Jones or any big legendaries. Good draws for Karatidom. We see most of the combo. We see another Death's Bite, a Grim Patron, and a Whirlwind, all setting up to be something of a nasty combo if he can. Unfortunately, he may be too low health to officially get the Grim Patron combo off in time. Another life tap from Fish. He's got plenty of life to spare to look for any damage that he can to get through this remaining now 8 health in Karatidom. More Murlocs on the board. This Murloc Warlock insanely strong against the Grim Patron Warrior currently. Cruel Task will come out and hit the Acolyte of Pain to allow a card draw as well as extra damage to trade into the 2/3 Murloc. Draw of a Fiery War Axe does not help at the moment. He'll instead play a Death Spite to reduce that charge down to 1 and hope for the Whirlwind charge next turn. And next turn, maybe he can play a Grim Patron as well. Still looking for a Warsong Commander, which he did get there at the last bit of the draw. So next turn could be pretty punishing for Fish if he's not able to seal the deal this turn, which it doesn't look like he's going to be able to. Soulfire will take him down to 1 armor and no cards to discard off that Soulfire, but Fish is out of hand, out of cards.
Charge forward!
Warsong Commander, Grim Patron, we see the absolutely standard Grim Patron combo coming out. Whirlwind from the Death Fight as well as Whirlwind and Stand. Going to help him create 4 Grim Patrons. All with charge. And that may just about be it for Fish. All of a sudden, just like that, Grim Patron turns it around, and Karatidom will take game number 1 against Fish in this best of 5 series. Again, we're watching the Rusty Horn weekly series.
Gul'dan versus Rexa.
Let the hunt begin. Your soul shall be mine.
So we take you now to game number 2, Fish versus Karatidom. Fish staying with his Warlock deck, and Karatidom moving on to his Hunter deck. See a kill command draw on turn number 2 for Karatidom. He elects to play Mad Scientist on turn number 1 with the coin. Could be helpful. He could pull out a freezing trap very early on. Unfortunately for the Murloc Warlock, none of the cards being sent back to your hand is incredibly... none of the cards being sent back to your hand is incredibly incapacitating. Mad Scientist will trade in with one of the priestesses, or the young priestess, leaving the other one on the board, who buffs herself, actually. Bit of a selfish maneuver from the priest. She'll be subject to Explosive Trap, so she'll be taken out, as well as the Flame Imp, which is a pretty big loss, given that the Flame Imp was not allowed to do any damage after being played. Bluegill Warrior will come out and do extra damage because of the added Grimscale Oracle, buffing the Bluegill to 3 damage. Lucky Knife Juggle on there, taking out the Grimscale Oracle. We see a kill command in hand, as well as Unleash the Hounds for Karatidom. Pretty powerful combo if this Murloc Warlock plays all of his cards. Fish already out of cards on turn 4, but luckily Warlock can life tap back in 2 cards per turn if needed. More small face hunter minions coming out. You just want to trade as much face as possible. Both are trying to rush the damage down as much as they can. Voidwalker Taunt from Fish is going to allow a bit of a defensive reprieve from face damage, hopefully, but it should be cleared off pretty easily by Karatidom. Eaglehorn Bow by Karatidom is pretty good. It'll allow him to weapon in right after finishing his Glaive Zuka charges. So that'll allow even more damage to come from Karatidom himself, as well as all of his minions. He doesn't have any more minions to play at the moment. But he'll elect to actually play the Eaglehorn Bow over the top of the Glaive Zuka, not using the 2 damage, instead opting for the 3. Murloc Tidecaller being drawn by Fish, as well as a Cold Light Seer already in hand. So the Murloc Tidecaller will gain a +1 attack, and the Cold Light Seer will give 2 health to the Murloc. Fish electing to call GG, and game number 2 will go to Karatidom. Alrighty, guys, we're into game number 3. This time, Fish using his Shaman deck against Karatidom's Rogue deck. Karatidom getting Sap, Sprint, and Deadly Poison for his opening hand, drawing a Fan of Knives as well. Fish having 2 Whirling Zap-O-Matics, a Cogmaster, Rockbiter weapon, and the coin. He's going to coin out a Whirling Zap-O-Matic on turn number 1, which is pretty strong to deal with considering Karatidom doesn't have any minions to answer with. Still drawing spells, plenty of rogue spells in his hand, but nothing to answer. He chooses to send the Whirling Zap-O-Matic back with a sap into Fish's hand. A Piloted Sky Golem drawn for Fish. Whirling Zap-O-Matic played again, this time on curve, and passing again. Still Karatidom hunting for those minions, trying anything he can. He draws a Blade Flurry. He's going to go with Deadly Poison onto his Hero Power Dagger to take out the Whirling Zap-O-Matic before it could deal 6 damage, instead taking only 3. Fish will play a Power Mace and go to the face. Really, Power Mace's effectiveness will come in its Death Rattle. 3 damage is pretty good for a weapon, but its Death Rattle gives other mechs +2/+2, so to land that on a Whirling Zap-O-Matic would be pretty big and really tough for Karatidom to deal with. Karate Dumb's going to prep sprint and draw out Lotheb and Azure Drake, his second deadly poison, and a backstab. Azure Drake's a pretty good sight to see, given that he can play that next turn, or Lotheb if he chooses to. Pretty good to finally be able to develop that board and get some presence on. Fish trying to develop his as well. It's sort of a race to develop in between these spells. Whirling Zap-O-Matic being played again. The Power Mace will give the Whirling Zap-O-Matic +2/+2, bringing him up to 5/4. That is a primary target now for Karate Dumb to get out off the board, given that he'll now take 10 damage a turn so long as the Whirling Zap-O-Matic continues to live. Fish still holding on to that Cogmaster. Now's really when it's going to be effective. It'll go from a 1-2 to a 3-2 now that he's got the Whirling Zap-O-Matic out on the board. Karate Dumb able to play a piloted Shredder and backstab onto the Whirling Zap-O-Matic, taking it out with the deadly poisoned Rogue Dagger, which expires. Piloted Shredder versus the Wrath of Air Totem is obviously a favored matchup, but Lotheb comes onto the board, pushing those rogue spells right out of range. Karate Dumb elects to answer the same and use his own Lotheb. So we have Lotheb versus Lotheb, spells out of range for both of these people. Fish will play Piloted Sky Golem as well as attack to face with Lotheb, which is pretty strong, but unfortunately, it looks like it's going to need to be Deadly Poison and Fan of Knives if he's going to clear this board completely. He'll backstab onto Lotheb to do 2 damage, as well as attack the Hold Murkai that spawns from the Piloted Sky Golem. Blade Flare does come out to clear the board completely, leaving Lotheb and the Succubus on Karate Dumb's side. We see a lot of face damage between these two players, obviously favoring the Face Hunter that we saw earlier, as well as the Murloc Warlock, very aggressive, almost zoo-like deck. Fan of Knives going to come out. Unfortunately, Fish is going to be milled 3 cards due to the Fel Reaver's Battle Cry. Or, I'm sorry, effect. Oof, losing Dr. Boom and a Fire Elemental in that second mill. That's pretty devastating for Fish. Dr. Boom and Fire Elemental are pretty significant cards to play to take the heat off of face damage. He'll draw Piloted Shredder, which it looks like Piloted Shredder and Spider Tank are going to be your best bets to reduce aggression. He will indeed play both of those, as well as a Cogmaster, to put out about as much damage on the board as he possibly can. Another sprint draw from Karate Dumb. That's pretty good, given that his hand is not really what he wants to see. He'll draw a Piloted Shredder off of the Azure Drake play. Fan of Knives, given that the Azure Drake buffed it to 2 damage, will take out both the Cogmaster and the Pirate dropped from the Piloted Shredder. Nothing but spells in Fish's hand now is sort of the reverse of what we saw the match open with. Karate Dumb only drawing spells in the first 3 or 4 turns. Now Fish only having spells in his hand in the late game, which arguably is worse for Shaman than it is for Rogue. Only having Crackle, 2 Earth Shocks, and a Rock Biter weapon is pretty tough to deal with, but he's going to silence and deal 1 damage to the Azure Drake and pass his turn. It's pretty rough to pass your turn on turn number 9 without developing the board any and only silencing an Azure Drake. A lot of minions coming onto the board for Karate Dumb. We see the Earthen Ring Farseer, the SI-7, and the Piloted Shredder all hitting the board on turn number 10 for Karate Dumb, developing that board and making it really stout against the 9 health Shaman. A Fel Reaver is a pretty strong draw, but you're unfortunately going to get milled. Your opponent only has 3 cards, so it is, I guess, a bit more favorable to play that Fel Reaver. You're just going to have to accept it, but he's already been milled 6 cards this round by his first Fel Reaver. Fish will call GG and surrender with his Mech Shaman. Karate Dumb taking game number 3. sure. All right, everybody. Hello and welcome to the second semifinals match for the RCS Rusty Horn number 4. We have Neo Marcus versus Imade. Neo Marcus sporting the Warlock deck, Imade favoring Druid for this first round in a best of 5. We saw early knife jugglers from Neo Marcus hit the board being cleared by Wrath, and then again by the hero power, and now a swipe from Imade on turn number 4. Neo Marcus consistently developing the board against an empty board from Imade, which is pretty strong, given that he's only drawn a Big Game Hunter, an Ancient of Lore, and Sylvanas, as well as Emperor Thorsan. Ancient of Lore will hit the board and draw Imade 3 cards, Sludge Belcher, Keeper, and Wild Growth. I'm sorry, 2 cards. He'll draw Sludge Belcher and Keeper. Neo Marcus using Implosion, only getting 2, unfortunately, below the average response of 3 from Implosion, but he'll get a 3rd one from that Imp Gang Boss, clearing off the Ancient of Lore with Mortal Coil, which is a pretty good way to clear, given his hand of 2 Power Overwhelmings and a Void Terror. Not a whole lot of value in those cards. Emperor Thorsan coming down from Imade, giving him pretty good value on 2 keepers, which is pretty strong. A better value Sylvanas is negligible, and a better value Wild Growth at this point in the game is also negligible. Power Overwhelming from one of the imps will trade into Emperor Thorsan to clear him off. Unfortunately, this Void Terror is only going to get 1/1 from both imps, going to a 5/5. Doomguard draw from Neo Marcus there at the end from his hero power is pretty good. A silence from the Keeper will put the Void Terror back down to 3/3. That's a pretty good answer, given that he had both Keepers already in his hand. Choosing to use one to silence Void Terror is what you want to do, given that 5/5 couldn't be taken out by the Big Game Hunter. Imade choosing whether or not to play the Druid of the Flame or the Sludge Belcher. At this point, he's taken already 11 points of damage. A Sludge Belcher probably wouldn't be that bad to put that barrier between himself and the face damage that Neo Marcus is favoring. Instead, he goes Druid of the Flame, uses the 2/5 variation, and plays his Wild Growth to gain a mana crystal. Imp Gang Boss and a Direwolf Alpha from Neo Marcus probably wouldn't be a bad play. Doomguard is a little risky at this point because you can lose some pretty decent cards in Neo Marcus's hand. He does play the Direwolf Alpha as well as the Doomguard, losing both Power Overwhelming and Imp Gang Boss, but clearing Imade's board fully once again. Imade's had a tough time this match developing his board. He struggled very early to get a board presence, given that he didn't draw any low mana cost minions. So he struggled to develop his board early, and Neo Marcus punished him for that.
I must safeguard the land.
Second Keeper is going to do 2 damage to the Dire Wolf and take it off the board, reducing the attack for both the Doomguard and the Void Terror. Hero Power will clear out the Void Terror, finally clearing it from the board, and playing a Sludge Belcher behind that to soften the Doomguard damage. Bane of Doom being used on the Sludge summons actually a Felguard, which isn't the best demon to summon, but it is a taunt, so it does allow some protection from any more damage from Imade. Good turn from Imade this round with a Sylvanas as well as a Druid of the Claw in taunt form. Looking for more damage from Neo Marcus, he draws out a Haunted Creeper, which isn't probably what he wanted to see, but a Lotheb play here isn't out of line because we can avoid any Force Savage combos by playing Lotheb. Extra damage on the Doomguard will clear off the taunt, and then a Felguard to the face just for added pressure.
So many
Ragnaros the Fire Lord making his appearance in a maid's deck. Wouldn't surprise me if we see him this turn. And he does actually play him. Really, any of these, so long as Ragnaros doesn't hit the Abusive Sergeant, any of these, if he kills Lotheb or hits the face, is a good play. Maid will make sure he can't hit the Abusive by using his hero power to clear off that Abusive Sergeant. Lotheb will fall to Ragnaros' first fireball of the match. Implosion, a good way to deal with Sylvanas early on, as it can only do the amount of her health remaining, and she will not get to steal any minions with her Death Rattle. Correction, I forgot that Imps happened before her Death Rattle, so she does, in fact, get a 1-1 Imp with her Death Rattle. 2 Haunted Creepers, obviously, Neo Marcus is playing everything he can to go to the face and assert pressure. Dr. Boom is a huge draw after a Ragnaros draw, and absolutely the necessary play to force more damage on the board and assert the dominance from the early game punishment that Neo Marcus put on Imade. Ragnaros hitting a Haunted Creeper, not what you want to see, but that's fine that it takes out one of the Haunted Creepers. A Doomguard draw from Neo Marcus is not that bad, given that his hand's empty. It's not going to sacrifice any cards. And you get a 5/7 charge for free, basically. He'll hero power behind it to get a Flame Imp. And likely going to see some trades have to happen here. Unfortunately, not going to be able to trade off Ragnaros. Dr. Boom is the higher priority target here. 7 damage to the face guaranteed versus 8 damage to the face possibly. You're going to want to target Dr. Boom and get him off the board as quickly as possible. Some other trades, probably the one of the Spectral Spiders will go into the Keeper. Instead, actually, Neo Marcus electing to go completely to the face to put on pressure and assert the fact that he has lethal. Well played coming from Imade. And that'll be it. Druid of the Claw in charge form will be 4 damage to the face. Imade will take game number 1 against Neo Marcus in this best of 4. I'm sorry, best of 5. Pretty fast round there. We saw Neo Marcus's Warlock deck, very aggressive. Both were very aggressive. Imade did not draw into his aggression as quickly as he would have liked. Neo Marcus again bringing his Warlock deck. Imade switching to the Paladin this round in game number 2. Looking at their hands, Neo Marcus looking at a Direwolf Alpha, Abusive Sergeant, or Power Overwhelming for his opening hand. Imade looking at Equality, Consecrate, Sylvanas, and Shielded Minibot. Probably not going to want Sylvanas this early in the game. 6 mana cost isn't going to do you a whole lot of good. He elects to trade it out for an Antique Heal Bot. Neo Marcus' opening hand of a Direwolf, an Abusive, and a Power Overwhelming is just about as good as you want to see from a Zoo or aggressive Warlock. Direwolf Alpha is going to allow you early game aggression. Same with Abusive Sergeant. And you can only hope to draw into lower cost minions to continue to be aggressive. Neo Marcus will actually trade off the Direwolf and the Power Overwhelming. He'll get a Void Caller and Doomguard for the trade. He'll play Abusive Sergeant on turn 1, not giving anyone the extra attack power, just trying to develop the board as quickly as he can. And May drawing Kel'Thuzad. So it'll be interesting to see how Kel'Thuzad factors into this deck. Unfortunately, drawn so early, 8 mana Kel'Thuzad is not going to pay off until later. And against an aggressive Zoo deck, it may not pay off at all. A Zoo Warlock isn't going to trade on the board very much at all because they're going to lose. Their cards will quickly lose efficiency if they're forced to trade on the board. So we won't see probably very much board clear from Neo Marcus. So Kel'Thuzad's effectiveness may be a bit limited in this match. Maid's going to coin out a shielded mini-bot, which is a pretty good response to an abusive sergeant. It allows a free clear if he wants to trade in for the divine shield on the shielded mini-bot. And given his hand, that was about the only play that Maid could have made, if not pass and wait until turn 2. Wouldn't surprise me if we see Direwolf and abusive to the face. Instead, he taps, draws a Void Terror for it. Zombie Chow is a good combat to aggressive decks like this Zoo Warlock. So it's being played very quickly by a Maid to further develop that board. Void Terror not able to gain anything off of his Battle Cry, which is quite unfortunate for a Void Terror. Normally you want to see him take the damage from a minion that's been power overwhelminged or anything like that to really boost the attack and health of the Void Terror. A 3/3 Void Terror is not great value for the Zoo Warlock. Tyrion Forgering and Kel'Thuzad now in a Maid's hand. That's a very strong legendary late game hand. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, it's probably not going to be as effective for Kel'Thuzad, but Tyrion Forgering is always effective for these paladin decks.
Put this apple on your head.
Reporting for duty.
Knife Juggler and a Hero Power will be all that's left for a Maid on this turn. Shielded Minibot going to the face after Void Terror being cleaned off by the Silverhand Recruit. Void Caller now in Neil Marcus's hand after playing his first Void Caller. Implosion getting 3. That's an average return for Implosion, but certainly favorable. 3 is better than 2, obviously. Neil Marcus drawing that Nerubian Egg, but unfortunately no ways to activate. No Defenders of Argus or anything else to activate that egg. So we'll have to see if he can get it out before Consecrate. It looked like Imaid was favoring playing Consecrate on this board, and I can't blame him because he would clear the Void Terror, or I'm sorry, the Void Caller, and would clear off all those imps. But I believe Neil Marcus wants to get that egg out before Consecration's played so that he can have it activated by the Consecration. Kazan Mystic being played by a Maid is pretty good. You're not going to see any secrets from the Warlock, so you're not going to get that Battle Cry. But a 4/3 for 4 mana is not that bad at all. It'll be cleared off by a Void Caller, and the Doomguard will actually be summoned without having to sacrifice 2 cards. The legendaries continue to draw for Imaid, now drawing Dr. Boom to complement Kel'Thuzad and Tyrion Forgering. Equality Consecrate, the old standby for Paladins, will completely clear this board, leaving only the Nerubian standing on Neo Marcus's side. At this point, with Imaid now at 20 health and Neo Marcus at 24, it wouldn't surprise me if we see all of these minions. In fact, we do. He plays nearly his entire hand, minus Power Overwhelming, to force that board. After seeing that first Consecrate from your enemy, you have to assume that, one, he either has the second Consecrate, or you're safe to play and develop your board. Neo Marcus favoring the second one and deciding that his board is safe to develop once again. Dr. Boom on turn 7. I don't know that I've ever seen Dr. Boom in a hand where somebody hasn't played him on turn 7. Just a terrific card to play on turn 7, but that's it for Imaid. Power Overwhelming onto the Nerubian will finish it off, and Neo Marcus will take game number 2. We're tied up 1-1 in this best of 5, Neo Marcus versus Imaid. We're going to take you right into game number 3 of this best of 5. We'll see who can edge out and tie the series, or take the lead in this series, and what decks these two have prepared to fight each other with next. We see completely new decks for both people. Neil Marcus favor now bringing Hunter to the table, and Maid bringing his Warrior deck. Ooh, it made unfortunately mulliganed into Emperor Thorsan and Big Game Hunter, choosing to keep his Fiery War Axe, which was a good choice. But Emperor Thorsan and Big Game Hunter are not what you want to see, and you certainly don't want to draw Ysera for turn number 1 as well. Coin Knife Juggler from Neil Marcus. This looks to be an aggro hunter, given that he's got 2 web spinners and a haunted creeper. We're going to see much of the same aggression Neil Marcus has favored throughout this series in his hunter deck, much like we saw in his warlock deck. Both web spinners coming out on turn number 2. Both web spinners being played. Acolyte of Pain being played by Imaid. Deathlord being played, hopefully to shield those web spinners from any damage. He'll go face with both of them. Although trading both web spinners is not that big of a deal, because you'll gain 2 beasts to your hand for both of them being played. Imaid will run the Acolyte of Pain into the Deathlord, only dealing 2 damage to the Acolyte of Pain and getting a free draw from it. He'll use 1 charge off of his Fiery War Axe to reduce the Deathlord down to 4 health. Tundra Rhino draw from the web spinners are not that bad, given that more beasts will be in Neil Marcus's deck, such as the Savannah Highmane that we already see in his hand. Mad Scientist draw is also pretty good. You could draw out one of your explosive traps or freezing traps to keep the pressure on your opponent. Again, Imaid drawing seems to be a legendary draw magnet. He now has Gromosh, Ysera, and Emperor Thorsan all in his hand for his warrior. Last time drawing Dr. Boom, Tyrion, and yet another legendary for his paladin. Ooh, Snake Trap being drawn with Mad Scientist on the board is a bit unfortunate. Mad Scientist could have played that for free, but instead he'll use the Ironbeak Owl to silence and get around that Sludge Belcher, which is absolutely the right play so that you don't have to trade anything to it. Imaid will execute the Death Lord. I don't know if that was the correct play there. It draws him an Acolyte of Pain when the Death Lord died. Not the greatest draw, but it does remove the taunt from the board. Neil Marcus getting his second Snake Trap played after the Mad Scientist was killed by the Sludge Belcher. Now drawing his second Mad Scientist. I doubt he has many more traps to play, so that second Mad Scientist probably not as useful. Beasts abound in Neil Marcus's hand. Savannah Highmane, Tundra Rhino, Panther, and Creeper, all taking center stage in Neil Marcus's hand. Imaid drawing his Death's Bite behind his Gromosh. More snakes. Why did it have to be snakes is what this Sludge Belcher's asking, as he's trading into a snake only to spawn 2 more. Emperor Thorsan play here is pretty good, given that he'll get discounts on Ysera and Gromosh. Instead, going with the Death's Bite plus Armor Up play. Cruel Task is looking for a trade. He'll trade favorably into the Haunted Creeper, spawning the Ethereal Spiders, or I'm sorry, the Spectral Spiders, after the Haunted Creeper dies. Unleash the Hounds, pretty good for this board. He'll draw 3, but unfortunately his board is chock full of spiders and snakes at the moment. going to need to get rid of some of these creeps if he expects to get a value Unleash the Hounds. Wouldn't surprise me if we see him trade his entire board and develop something like a Savannah Highmane or the Tundra Rhino onto this board. These 1/1 minions are great for clearing, but not much else. Not going to really assert damage onto this warrior, who's going to continue to hopefully armor up, and those 1/1s will continually lose their effectiveness as the match drags on. Neo Marcus only uses hero power and passes his turn with 5 mana remaining. I'm not sure if I wouldn't have at least developed a Jungle Panther onto the board for that one. Imade choosing to play Emperor Thorsan and Armorsmith on his turn. This Whirlwind will activate off his Death's Bite and clear off the rest of Neo Marcus's board. Good discounts coming from Emperor Thorsan this time, not only hitting Ragnaros and Gromosh, but also hitting Ysera. All 3 legendaries that are pretty important to the warrior, especially later, now only going to be cheaper and more value. Third trap coming from Neo Marcus after that Mad Scientist is actually Freezing Trap. If Imade wants to probe for that, he could attack with Emperor Thorsan and actually save his Emperor Thorsan from trading away on the Jungle Panther. Imade tests the trap with Gromosh, actually. Gromosh is forced to return to the hand now, costing 10 mana. He'll clear off this Jungle Panther with his second Fiery War Axe and reduce Neo Marcus's board to clear once again. Emperor Thorsan continuing to deliver those value discounts. That's quickly going to become a priority for Neo Marcus, as the more discounts Emperor Thorsan gives, the more important it becomes to remove him from the board. Shield Maiden play here, not bad, given that a Savannah Highmane was just played. You know that that's some serious damage, and he doesn't really have a way to get rid of it unless he attacks him with his Fiery War Axe and executes the Savannah Highmane, but that's not the greatest trade you could make. A cheapened Ragnaros, only 6 mana now, will hit the board, and hopefully Ragnaros will help clear the Savannah Highmane for free. Emperor Thorsan continuing to dish out those value discounts. Ragnaros does clear the Savannah Highmane, leaving only the hyenas behind. Eaglehorn Bow and an Ironbeak Owl. If he really wanted to, he could silence either of them. Hopefully he would silence Emperor Thorsan. Silencing Ragnaros allows him to hit you for 8. Silencing Emperor Thorsan only removes the discounts. Knife Juggler Unleash the Hounds is a popular play now for hunters. He's looking for that second, and he actually gets it. So good knives there. Actually clears Emperor Thorsan without needing to trade any minions in at all. Really great, effective knives there from the Knife Juggler. RNG was on Neo Marcus's side. He's going to play the Eaglehorn Bow and push in with all of these minions to clear off the Shield Bearer, and use the remaining 2 doggies to go to face. We see Gromosh again now back down to 8 mana, down from his 10 that he was returned with Freezing Trap. But pretty dire straits for Imade at the moment. 6 health, only with Ragnaros on the board. Sludge Belcher might help with that, but you know you're going to take 2 guaranteed from the Hunter hero ability. So you have to hope that he doesn't have any response to the Sludge Belcher. Unfortunately, We know through the power of our vision that Neo Marcus is carrying an Ironbeak Owl to neutralize that Sludge Belcher taunt. Whew, lucky rag hit there. Takes 8 damage to the face, but that's not enough. He gets a knife hit onto the face, and 2 doggies plus the hero power will allow Neo Marcus to carry game number 3. Neo Marcus will take the lead 2-1 in this series against the Maid in this best of 5 series. We're going to go right into game number 4 now. Really aggressive decks coming from Neo Marcus in this tournament. Wouldn't surprise me. We're going to see Warlock versus Mage. Wouldn't surprise me if we see more aggression from Neo Marcus. His opening hand, Lotheb, Mad Scientist, and Flame Waker indicates that we're going to likely see a lot of spell aggression from Neo Marcus. That Flame Waker looking to be as much value as possible. Opening hand for Maid on his warrior is going to be Sludge Belcher, Acolyte of Pain, Death's Bite, and Cruel Task, as well as Dr. Boom on his turn 1 draw. Mad Scientist on curve is very good for Neo Marcus. It's going to allow him to pull out any secrets, such as Ice Block or Ice Barrier if he's running them, or Duplicate. Nothing but spells for Neo Marcus. This sets up pretty well. Two mana Frostbolts and a 4 mana Fireball are pretty strong, but he's going to use 1 Frostbolt to clear off this Acolyte of Pain, only allowing him to draw 1 card from the Acolyte of Pain. Wouldn't surprise me if we see either the Mechanical Yeti or the Unstable Portal next round. Mechanical Yeti might be good to force face damage on the board as well as spell damage in your hand. Neo Marcus contemplating the Mana Worm play and then using likely Frostbolt to attack into the Armor Smith. Armor Smith only able to give 2 armor before finally being taken down. Not a favorable Armor Smith for a Maid at all. Generally, you want to see an Armor Smith give 4, 5, or 6 armor if possible, given the right circumstances and the right board. There's Unstable Portal by Neo Marcus. He actually pulls Lotheb for 2 mana. It's a pretty strong minion to pull out of the Unstable Portal. But it doesn't look like Maid is running a very spell-heavy deck, so it's not going to be as profitable as, say, against a Druid or Rogue. Cruel Task will clear off Neo Marcus's Mad Scientist, and Mirror Entity will actually be played by the Mad Scientist and allow another Cruel Taskmaster to spawn for Maid. He'll attack in with his final charge of Death's Bite and play Shield Block to pass his turn. Second Unstable Portal from Neo Marcus. Now going to use his hero power to ping off that Taskmaster and play the Yeti. We've seen a pretty consistent board from Neo Marcus versus an intermittent board from Maid. He's actually going to use Cruel Task to execute the Yeti, which would have been fine if we didn't know that Lotheb sat in Neo Marcus's hand. The Rusty Horn draw from the Mechanical Yeti is pretty good if he wants to taunt up Lotheb or another large creature, but otherwise probably pretty useless. Wow. Pulling Mechanier Thermoplug out of the Unstable Portal. 2 legendary minions being pulled from the Unstable Portals today. Neo Marcus having some serious RNG with his portals. Rusty Horn onto the Lotheb like we talked about. Pretty strong to get rid of any aggression to the face from Maid. Not what you want to see. Well, Shield Slam will take care of Lotheb pretty quickly. Both Dr. Boom and Ragnaros sit in Imade's hand. Pretty strong legendary minions, but unfortunately he has to get to a point where he can develop the board and play both of those. Neo Marcus's original Lotheb now being played on curve. Hero Power and Mana Worm will reduce Imade's board down to nothing once again. Ragnaros making his appearance now, I believe, for the 4th time in this tournament, going to the face instead of Lotheb or the Mana Worm. Two fireballs with a Sorcerer's Apprentice is pretty intimidating, but not enough to seal the deal. Going to use one fireball and a Mana Worm to trade into that Ragnaros to reduce the possibilities of more RNG face hits with that 8 damage fireball from the lovely Ragnaros. Emperor Thorsan again making his appearance in this tournament. Been pretty strong so far. Imade and Neo Marcus both have used Emperor Thorsan to pretty great effect so far in this series. Good discounts coming from Imade. Really good discounts on Dr. Boom as well as Gromosh, but Sludge Belcher also being discounted is pretty strong. Mech-Ganir Thermoplug finally being played from that unstable portal. And the fireball, the second fireball being used to clear off that Emperor Thorsan. Mech-Ganir Thermoplug is not what Imade wants to see in this tournament, and especially in this match, given that it's a 9-7, and he's got to figure out some way to get rid of it without doing a ton of damage to himself. Luckily, he has an execute, but he has to get some form of damage onto that Mech-Ganir Thermoplug to clear it. Sort of an unforeseen consequence is that Mech-Ganir Thermoplug does 9 damage, which would make him fully trade his Gromosh before Enrage, which is not what Imade wants at all. Neo Marcus pulling Mech-Ganir from the unstable portal means he's probably more likely to trade in Mech-Ganir Thermoplug into Gromosh. Everyone knows how tough Gromosh can be when he gets that 6 attack Enrage. He will have to trade in with the Fiery War Axe and the Execute. He was looking for a way to do it without face damage, and I can't blame him there. But sometimes you have to make the tough calls, and he knows he'll likely take 5 damage from Lotheb this turn, hoping that maybe the enraged Gromosh will sort of act as a taunt, and hopefully Neo Marcus will trade in. But Flame Cannon will actually allow the Flame Waker to reduce Gromosh down to 1 health and pinged off. Really an unfortunate way for Gromosh to exit. The Flame Waker really getting... Neo Marcus's RNG this tournament has been something to envy. Drawing 2 legendaries out of an unstable portal, as well as getting the first Flame Waker to hit the correct target twice.
No.
Truly is something to aspire to. I know I want that kind of RNG whenever I'm playing on ladder and in arena. Both Sludge Belchers sit in Imade's hand. It would be very difficult to convince me not to play a Sludge Belcher. You're facing way too much damage on this board. You're looking at least the damage getting through probably from Lotheb. You have to assume spells, so the Flame Waker is going to use 2 damage on you. So it's not looking great for Imade. He's considering all his options. I would say at least the 4-mana Sludge Belcher and the Shield Maiden are going to be what you have to play to continue to live. Oof. Imade instead actually going to rope out on turn 10. Don't know whether that was intentional or not, but Neo Marcus will take game number 4, sealing this series. So In our tournament, we will now see Neo Marcus versus Karate Dum for the finals of the RCS Rusty Horn Weekly number 4. As I said, you guys are watching the RCS Rusty Horn series brought to you by Random Championship Series. If you'd like to find out more about the RCS Rusty Horn series, you can visit us online at randomcs.com, or you can find us on Twitter at twitter.com/esportsrcs. Follow us on Facebook as well, facebook.com/esportsrcs. There's a newsletter on the Facebook page you can sign up for and get all of tournament news. Random CS not only limited to Hearthstone, we also do league tournaments as well. You can find all of that information and more on the website, randomcs.com. We'll be back in just a little bit once we get our finals match set up. Again, it'll be Karate Dum versus Neo Marcus for the finals. You've been watching Rusty Horn Weekly number 4. Stay tuned as we get into the final match for tonight.
Good to see you again. Come in and shut the door.